I found Mr. Trill's residence easily enough, as it was listed in a phone book I found in an empty library. The subject of my next piece lived in an apartment building strangled by thick ivies, which no doubt conducted the last of its metropolitan juices through its hungry green tubers. The overall result was nothing less than a house half-eaten. A wide, cracked balcony sat high within the concrete crown of the dwelling, waving its massive arms above it, a living canopy of shifting green. A single lantern dangled from an overhanging branch, whispering amber light at the pooling shadows. I knew the balcony coupled to the room of my quarry. Why else would it be there? I kept well out of sight, moving behind the town's beautiful curtain of decay, allowing the germinating emptiness to erase all traces of my passage. The shadows barely reckoned my presence until I was well past the building's foyer. A warm breeze wandered the overlarge room, gently disturbing the billowing curtains that fell like filthy fabric waterfalls from the tops of the tall windows, splashing in ragged waves across the unclean floor. The spacious lobby held a single note of choking desolation, playing to the void that frolicked its hollows. I moved to the stairwell, drifting upward like a whispered prayer, silent and secret. There were persons, after a fashion, ambling through the dim hallways, living and moving for reasons no one cared to know. The dust in the air was thick, playing like clouds of lethargic gnats, idling between the fading bars of light projecting across the floor from soiled windows. I felt like I was haunting the spaces of an ancient murder house, merely the deathly echo of a forgotten hunter, eternally condemned to chase the dust of his victims through endless halls of stumbling shadows. I entered the room neighboring the apartment that connected to the balcony. The place was like a photograph after a flood, colorless and faint. An old man slept within, dried and crumbling beneath the bitter weight of too much time. He was perfectly pointless, hardly suitable for my purposes, and yet I was feeling charitable. Finally, I allowed him to express the power the flesh of his washed-out existence might have enclosed, had only it been fashioned by the songs of fallen angels or the bright nightmares of lost children. In his last moments, the man seemed to appreciate what he was becoming, after I had thrown off the tomb of his flesh, allowing him to gaze at the dream beneath. I cleaned myself off in the tiny cove of a bathroom, and proceeded out the window onto thick tendrils of ivy. I gained the balcony above in but a few moments, inching around the flickering sheet of light cast by the lantern. Unlocking the door barely broke my stride as I secreted myself inside. The room was drab, sparsely decorated, and hadn't been cleaned for some time. Everywhere was sprinkled the simple, stupid details that spoke to nothing save an occupant of the least imaginative variety. After a thorough investigation, all I discovered was that for some reason, a power beyond the bit of nature desired the death of a man who, for all intents and purposes, was only alive in the most basic of definitions. Doubting this conclusion enough to inspect the room a second time, I searched through its every detail, interrogating every pore of pointlessness. Mercifully, something stood out during my second look. It wasn't a detail that I found, but a generality. The room was too eager to convince. It was all wrong, betraying a confidence born of skill. The furniture, the decorations, everything. Like a smiling corpse, the room was an expression without emotion. The interior appeared exactly as it should, but there was a precision and restraint to it all, a deliberate calculus of dullness. The room was a mask. I searched with new eyes, looking for the edges of the disguise, wishing to pull it back. Of course, I felt like a fool when I realized what distinguished the apartment from all of the other wan spaces of the fading building. It was the balcony. Or more accurately, the view. The lofty vantage delivered a fine look at a small church leaning into the woods, where saprophytic legion searched its cracked skin, seeking nourishment. No sooner had I turned to make for the church than I detected an echo of dream shrinking into the spaces of the balcony, faintly traced by the silence of lantern light and coiling shadows of ivy. The fragment was only slightly alive, like smoldering ashes after a fire. I also sensed something different about the dream. It was unusually strong, akin to prehistoric visions pressed into painted limestone, affording the heft of purposes greater than the self. Before I could contemplate the dream any longer, it died into a commanding silence, as though by the authority of dead kings. Something was coming. Suddenly, I could feel eyes pushing into me, searching. It was as if the night itself had come alive, staring at me through coldest darkness, pouring its blackening gaze into the spaces of my mind and body. Having located whatever it sought, the presence melted back into inanimate sheets of falling night. I was stunned. I had no idea what had happened, or why, but it was all magnificent. I went back inside, deciding to sleep in my newly acquired residence before heading to the church. I hoped to revisit the strange dream before it disappeared too deeply into sleep. Settling on the small bed, I proudly looked upon the congealing peace I'd created earlier. With that vision behind my eyes, I drifted into slumber. Unfortunately, I wasn't brought any closer to the desired dream, but I did manage to glimpse something sleeping beneath Suttercraft. I saw strange coffins nestled in deep earth, waiting like monsters under a child's bed. Far deeper into the black soil, within a stratum of earth so old it was little more than liquid darkness, I spied a casket the size of the entire city. The dream conducted me beyond the petrified wood of its construction, allowing me to peer at the thing within. Rotting and waiting within that damp, titanic box was an entity as ancient to the world as it was utterly alien to it. The sound of the creature's patience was bottomless and beckoning. I could only guess at the quality, or quantity, of death required to transmit life to something so far beyond all this blowing dust. I immediately understood why the White Gaia, that dreadful queen of the dead world, had pressed the thing so close to her bosom. For if life were to reach such a thing... As I drifted away from the timeless sleeper, a familiar gaze burned into my dream, looking at me with equally bottomless and beckoning impatience. I could feel the scorching hunger of countless wolves wash across me like searing wind. My dream was melting from the mounting heat, gazes and hungers collapsing into a single surging stare. The dream was no longer my own. The new dreamer crushed me into the shape of a wolf, and a cosmic starvation overfilled my guts. I couldn't contain the emptiness. I sprang awake in a slick of sweat, my stomach howling. I collected my family. They seemed every bit as ravenous as the wolves. We would all need to feed, and soon. The dream of hunger was no longer new to me, but now it had escaped from sleep, taking refuge within us all. My sisters were near frenzy, blazing starving smiles, and my father's burning hunger nearly threw me from the house and into the night. I forced myself to slacken my pace and absorb the sights. From the moon-frosted meadows, I could clearly see the corpse of the town splayed out across the encroaching forest. Suttercraft looked like some dead brown and drying serpent's husk, its crooked gambrel spines occasionally breaching the tops of the trees, revealing the places where it had fallen so long ago. I tried to focus on Mr. Trill and the lost dream he would finally recall, but my father's strength was greater than my own, and I quickly found myself embraced by the shadows surrounding the church. My hunter's silence spread out all around me. and my thoughts disappeared into my sister's famished smiles.